you know, contested space is nothing new. We just had fewer satellites up there, but they still were extremely important, whether it was Milstar and Discus and the Navy UFO, when we're talking about Milsatcom. But we were very concerned because the Soviets had a core orbital ASAT system, which was pretty effective. They had tested it a number of times and had shot down satellites and added to the debris field, which we were concerned with even back then. And we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? So I was a captain in the Pentagon, and I actually was the program monitor for the air-launched ASAT system. So we took an F-15 and we flew it to altitude, and we released a small missile with a miniature homing vehicle, and we took out a satellite on the first shot. It was just incredible. The first time we engaged the satellite that we took it out. So all of a sudden, we have entered into contested space, and we have an answer to what the Soviets had been doing for years. In fact, they had a system for many years before we developed that system. And so then what happened next? Well, we were planning. We were going to go ahead and put together a squadron out at Edwards, and we were going to have this capability, and it was really meant more for deterrence, to make sure that Soviets didn't go ahead and take out our systems, and to deter them from doing that. And you know, that's a good question today. What kind of deterrence are we looking at as we consider this whole situation and the architectures which are to come? And I think that's a very important point. So here I had the wonderful opportunity to watch this system come about, and then Congress decided to act. And they essentially threw a red flag, and it was, I think, 24 hours after the test that George Brown from California, Riverside, threw the red flag and put a moratorium on any ASAT testing from then on out. So all of a sudden we have a policy decision coming from Congress that we are not going to have a ASAT system or the capability, and that it was going to be a unilateral situation in which the Soviets had one and we did not. So where did we go from there? And the point I want to make is that a lot of this discussion depends upon what is our national strategy and policy. Yes, we do have a national security space policy, and we do have a national policy. But then the question is, what do we do? What is the planning document? What kind of action do we take? And I'm sure that there's a lot of classified documents that we are not privy to, which discuss this. But that discussion, whether, for example, if we have a satellite, if we have an advanced EHF satellite, which is taken out by an ASAT or jammed, and we have attribution, we can figure out who did it. What do we do? What do we do? Do we just sit there and take it? Then it becomes an argument on resiliency and how many satellites do we need, and I mean, it's completely different then, and Ed, you kind of touched on this, or do we go after the site? If it's a homeland site within the bad actor's homeland, do we take it out? I mean, if it's pretty clear that that's what we're going to do, then we have deterrence working on our side. So I think that this whole discussion really needs to start at what is the national policy, what is the national strategy, and what kind of reaction would take place if we have our satellites either jammed or attacked by a bad actor. That's where it starts. And I don't think that we have a clear road ahead, and that's why we're here in this discussion and discussing various ways of going about. And granted, DoD is doing a protected SATCOM architecture. They've done a FLAST. They're looking at wideband and broadband architectures. They're looking at how to bring in hosted payloads. They're looking at resiliency. They're looking at all these things and trying to grapple with, you know, what is the way forward. And Todd, you've done a great work here because it really brings up the questions. It looks at different ways, various ways of going forward. So I think that's where we start, is looking at that. And I think you're
Well, we found your slide.
There we go. There we go. Okay, the Wi-Fi is working. But Todd really touches on it when he talks about the three-tiered system, and I think this is critical to the whole idea. You really need this, and what we believe, what we've looked at, and we know that DoD is looking at this, and you're all probably very familiar with this, and this comes down to the core systems, the dedicated assets, which have been serving the military, advanced EHFs, the WGSs, the MUOSs. They're very important now, and they're probably going to be very important into the future. What do you do? How do you work with those, along with hosted payloads, free flyers, lease services, commercial services? It all comes together, and we really believe that you augment the dedicated systems moving into the future. And as Todd pointed out, you have to be very careful on when you start new competitions on some of these satellite systems, because then that causes cost, it causes perturbation. Is it better to do a PQ die? Do you evolve these systems? Do you continue to add systems or procedures which add resiliency and protection to these systems? And we believe that that's the best way forward, and then you add the hosted payloads and maybe smaller free flyers, and you disaggregate the architecture to some extent. And Todd has talked about that in a pretty clear manner in his report. Now let me give you an example, WGS here. You know, how low can you go? That's what I call this slide. How low can you go? Well, in the case of WGS, because we're building the same satellite, at least the same bus, not perhaps the same payload, for the commercial sector with the 702 HP for Intelsat and Inmarsat and SES, etc., on the same production line. So we have economies of cost effectiveness here. So we have a mature program, 6 satellites are up there operating, 4 in production. And I would like to mention international partnerships. We do have an officer from Australia here, and it was mentioned that we need to pivot to Asia. We already have with WGS. We pivoted to Asia. They bought, in fact, WGS-6, which was just launched successfully. And interestingly enough, they have a hosted payload on Inmarsat, which is a UFO payload, or a UHF payload, and they're using that very effectively, as is the U.S. Navy. So I think that's a very good illustration of where our systems have pivoted to Asia and are helping out our allies. Now, if you go to commercial practices, which we have done on WGS, because once again we had this capability as we are producing these satellites on the commercial side as well, you can save about 25% off the top, and we have. Going to reduced government oversight, reduced reporting, and firm fixed price, commercial like performance-based payments. We've been able to drive the price down 25%. And as you see on the bottom here, we saved $150 million for the Air Force across the latest 3 satellites that they bought, 7, 8, and 9. Now, do you want to go lower? Do you want to go to a complete commercial satellite? You can. You start removing anti-jam, you start removing certain spot beams, you start removing channelizers and some on-board processing, and essentially this becomes a full commercial satellite. So the customer can do that if they want. If they want to go that low, we can do it. If they want to accept the risk, we could do a deliver in orbit. We've done it before with the Navy. So that is possible. So if you want to have cost savings and do that, that's great. But we have the balance of resiliency and protection. If we want to go to the middle tier, you can do, we already have some anti-jam capability on this satellite. You can add more. So you don't want to perhaps take 50% off the satellite and go pure commercial. You want to balance this a bit and keep the anti-jam and the protection and some of the inherent capability and add some of that in, and then you have a resilient system. So the point of this slide is you have a continuum, and you can start at the top, and you can start moving down and taking 25% savings off the top pretty easily just through processes. And then if you want to start throwing some of the mil specs off, do a DIO and a few other things, then you can get it down to the cost of just a straight commercial satellite. So the alternative is there. Okay, there we go. Another point is, as I mentioned before, we are building on the same assembly line. We're building commercial satellites as well as military satellites. You start with the same bus, and then you go and bring in what is needed on the payload. So once again, we have economies of scale. We have the same production line. We can scale the satellite size and power and capability into the niche that the customer needs, whether it's the commercial side or whether it's the military or the intel side. So once again, this enables us to be very cost effective when we meet the customer need, whatever that may be. So it can be a completely pure commercial satellite system, or it can be a very protected system, depending upon the cost and the need and what the customer requires of us. So once again, I think that this flexibility is very important. So it really comes down, I think, that the study was well done. There is a lot of perspectives in it. I think the three-tiered system makes a lot of sense. We've been here before, so the question is, what is the clear way ahead that the DoD and the national security community is going to take? And what is the clear policy which engenders or moves us in a certain direction? And I don't think it's really that clear yet, but I think that's where you start. What is the policy? What kind of reaction? What is the plan? What is the deterrence? And so that really depends upon, or once they make that decision, it really shapes the whole approach that we would have and what they would pick out of your good presentation and your good study. So that's what I got.